Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. Now, some of you must have heard by now that I've made the argument that they're trying to provoke me. Now, why would they try to provoke me? Well, perhaps a better question is why would someone in my shoes or who's targeted, why would they feel like they should maybe threaten the government or maybe talk about retaliating? What have you? Okay. Why would they feel like doing that? Well, first of all, they're changing the sound of my voice. When you're serious and they're trying to mock you, it pisses you off. When the subject matter is very important, like say they're threatening your family or something, they say they kidnapped your kid, what have you, there's going to come a point when you're just going to start being very angry. And a lot of people will start threatening people. And some people will just start, fighting with people. Some people would just kill somebody. Okay, and that's very important to understand. So when you look at the mainstream mental health argument, and I'm sure some mental health professionals want to agree with me, but they probably would lose their job if they agree with me, depending on the situation. You look at the mainstream mental health argument, it goes like this: that if somebody's angry, that they should immediately say they have a mood disorder or something and drug them. It basically goes like that, especially if somebody is angry in a way that is taboo in society, right? That they're not a mainstream right-wing person or mainstream left-wing person or libertarian, but they kind of just tell the whole truth and they get angry. So they say, well, how should they solve the problem? The CIA and the government, they basically have a massive mental health network, and they tell them um, to try to stifle political dissent for the greater interest of public safety or whatever. They give them some bullshit argument, or maybe they're in a secret society and they know better than that and they know exactly why it's going down. That's part of what secret societies do, is they kind of plot to social engineer, and they use the various institutions of social control, like Francis Galton said, for the purpose of eugenics and social control, and in a way that's unconstitutional, what have you. And I'm sure by now, anyone who's listening to this video, by this point in this video, rather, you know that I'm right. You know that there could be no other way. It's very straightforward. There's a lot of corruption in society, and that corruption doesn't magically miss mental health and psychiatry. Psychiatrists are extremely notorious for corruption and the political abuse of psychiatry. Just look up the political abuse of psychiatry and see how many hits you get. Okay. So their explanation is basically that if you don't see things a certain way and that you're angry, you're mentally ill. And it goes beyond, you know, what your name is, your height, what city you're in, what have you. Right? I'm in Michigan, I'm 6'4", I have curly hair, I'm wearing a white hooded sweater, I'm making a video right now for the internet to upload to YouTube, and so on and so forth. Okay. The year is 2026, it's January, and on and on and on, right? So I'm in reality, okay? And I disagree with the government's plan for society. I see people on the news saying that America needs to turn to God and repent. And before they said that, I made countless videos about how things are getting very heated. And before you know it, there's going to be a disaster. And lo and behold, here comes the coronavirus. Here comes all these conflicts that are out of the ordinary. In the past 30 years, the last 10 years have seen a lot of conflict and a lot of strange occurrences, what have you. And I basically predicted that in my video series because I'm more in reality, basically, than everyone else. It's a long story why that is. Now, some people might disagree with that, but bear with me, you'll see why I say that by the end of this video, hopefully. So their explanation is if somebody is targeted by the government and they claim that they're using technology, fumes, and poisons, and they start getting angry, and if they get angry at a point and they start saying, well, if they do that, then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, right? That magically they're crazy and that they are a threat to themselves or others or whatever they would say. Okay, when you look at it, what should law enforcement do, right? They should talk to the person. Well, why did you say this? Okay, do you know what your name is? Do you know what the date is? Okay, do you know how tall you are? What color sweater you are? Do you know what's going on? You know you're talking to law enforcement, right? And just kind of establish that they live in reality. Do you know that if you commit a crime that you'll get in trouble? Okay, or well, if they catch you, right? And so on and so forth. So why isn't that the national policy? Why in California do they have 5150? I don't know what they have in Michigan, but Why did they overstep their bounds? Well, it goes back to the political abuse of psychiatry. Where did cancel culture come from in popular culture? Okay, and when did it come there? Well, I've been saying for years. I made my first video about psychiatry in 2011. It was probably about 2020, maybe 21, something around there, where people start saying, "Oh, there's this cancel culture, and it's on the left," right? Now, things like that were always occurring, right? Countries and political parties have always kind of tried to play you out as an idiot or cancel you or whatever. But when they started saying there is this very organized cancel culture, that occurred maybe 10 years after I was saying that they're abusing psychiatry into next week on record with many viewers. Well, maybe not, not so many. I mean, I had maybe hundreds of viewers. Okay, and at some point in my channel, one of my channels over time, it ended up having like 1,000 subscribers, but I've lost access to that channel, maybe 2,000 subscribers, which for me is a lot of subscribers. In the last couple channels I made, one of them has like maybe a little bit less than 200 subscribers, and I had to work very hard to get there, and they're like all government assets or some. It's a story for another day. And for example, they might say, well, how do you know they're government assets? How do you know that they're part of some kind of massive political network or something, okay, that's paranoid? Well, there's a lot of evidence that they aren't aware of that shows that that's a logical conclusion, which goes back to the difference between the moral warrior interpretation of what occurs when someone who's targeted starts threatening to retaliate against the government, maybe with physical force, and what mental health would say. And so should life be a game, or should your constitutional rights be given to you? So if somebody isn't actually a threat to themselves or others past a certain point in a way that calls for an intervention, then people should do anything about it. Now some of you say, well, that's not fair. Well, let me give you an example here. We see all these rock and roll people, heavy metal people, and they're acting crazy and they're doing drugs. They're absolutely a threat to themselves or others. They even say sex, drugs, and rock and roll, things that lead to violence, things that lead to rape, things that lead to destruction. They're not only a threat to themselves and others, they're encouraging millions of people. Really, one of these Slipknot videos had like 200 million views. And I'm not saying that rock and roll should be illegal, but there's a reason why they leave these people alone. It has to do with the mentalities that they're trying to allow in the country and the mentalities they're not trying to allow. So they're not applying the equal protection clause of the Constitution. And so it is with gangster rap. Okay, and these guys in their videos and their interviews, they're showing these guns they're not supposed to have. And why aren't the feds raiding? I'm not saying they should raid. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But I'm saying that is absolute hypocrisy. So you're telling me if somebody gets targeted and they get pissed off and start huffing and puffing, that you should magically send the police or something like this. Okay, but if somebody's a gang member in a kill zone, okay, in Chicago or New Orleans or whatever, St. Louis, and they're showing machine guns they're not supposed to have and people are on parole around them, that you're not going to raid them? Now why? Now some people say, well, that's a matter of national security. Now why is it a matter of national security? Because they're trying to encourage other people to do the same and make the mistake of going on the internet and showing their guns and say, hey, there we got you, right? So you have some kind of an agenda. Now, why did you put those resources to catching these people instead of preventing them from wanting to do that in the first place? Now you say, well, how would we prevent them? By allowing someone like me to have his freedom of speech, perhaps, because I'm the top martial artist ever possible. And a child should be able to tell you that more respectable than Snoop Dogg, Tupac, and 50 Cent all put together is the top martial artist ever possible. But instead you suppress my videos and provoke me. And I can then apply that scale to all the other targets, that you are not thinking straight when it comes to giving people their rights. And you're not applying the equal protection clause of the Constitution correctly. How could somebody who doesn't officially work for the government, who's just a gang member that you may have an understanding with, how can you give them the right to break the law and to do donuts with a machine gun and to smoke and to sniff coke or whatever they do in their videos these days? How can they be given that pass? What gives them the legality to authorize them to do that? Because obviously it's some bullshit and they're just trying to set people up, right? And if we look at how the cities are organized, what kind of funding they have, how they waste money instead of spending it on cost-effective social programs, and we see that pattern time and again. What are the odds in all 50 states that not a single one of them is governed effectively? What are the odds of that? There are children that could govern better than any governor in any state right now. No offense to anybody, these are the facts that need to be said. And I am somebody who hopefully will work with some of these governors to implement some of my plans in the future. But this has to be said that much, then I'm going to go ahead and say it. And again, on that note, I'd like to remind people we can agree to disagree on things, including me having insulted you if you want to consider it that, and still work for the best interests of humanity together. Okay. So you see what I'm saying here. Now, let us talk about my case briefly here, and let's wrap this up. So I ask you all, what's more compelling? If somebody goes to work for 2 weeks and then goes for their boss for their paycheck, and that boss doesn't give them their paycheck, they'd be pissed off, their family would be pissed off, anyone who hears about it would probably be pissed off, right? How much more if somebody is a brain surgeon's son, and they fume them, and they poison them, and they cripple them, and they keep them from working for years, specifically by crippling them and stressing him out. So he's sitting there crippled and fumed and poisoned and stressed out all the time, not knowing if he's going to go blind again, not knowing if he's ever going to be able to walk again, when he starts feeling numb and his back starts aching and things like this. What's more compelling? What's worse? Them neglecting that worker for his check for 2 weeks and not giving them their check, their rightful check, or them not giving me my rightful compensation? Even before we get into who I am and how it takes on cosmic proportions. Pretty straightforward. Many people, if they weren't paid their check after 2 weeks, especially if they got evicted or something, they probably would want to blank their bosses, right? The K word, K-I-double-L, right? Am I wrong? So how can we then turn around and say, hey, why would this guy then say, well, they better not when he's having a bad mood? Okay, when he's in a bad mood. And if he posted, say I posted the video, so what? It's on the internet. Did I call them up personally and say, hey, and say X, Y, and Z, No. So that is the difference between a moral warrior analysis and the stated arguments of mental health professionals, the common stated arguments of mental health professionals. It's basically across the board. I'd imagine at this point is very close to it. You know, if they don't take that stance, you know, the state stance, and they're seen as a quack or something and played out. And we've seen that happen before. Well, we've seen that before, absolutely. If you do enough research, you'll come across quite a bit of that. It was pretty straightforward. They're even denying the mental health professionals their constitutional rights, because the government is not supposed to say, hey, you know, if you want to keep your job, you better do this and this. They should not be pressing them and insisting that they do things that are unconstitutional. Same thing with the police and their blue code of silence, the blue wall, the code of silence. They should not say to them that they better keep the damn code of silence or else they're going to lose their job. That is sick. And that's what we see going on here. Okay? Going back to the compensation, you can imagine, I can't stress this enough. Now, keep in mind that in the ghetto, I mean, I live very close to Detroit right now, which is, depending on how you slice it, it's either the second most dangerous city in America, the third, the fourth, or the fifth, according to a whole lot of people, right? According to the official chart or whatever you want to call it, okay? It's the second through fifth most dangerous city in America. People out here get killed over a pair of sunglasses, they say, over $20, over a dice game, okay? And most people who live in the area, they don't think the guys who kill them are necessarily crazy. They might think they're desperate. They might think this, that, and the other thing, but they don't think they're necessarily mentally ill. They think they're kind of pushed over the edge. There's a difference here. Mental illness, it was semantics. They don't think, let me rewind here. They don't think that they have a biological dysfunction, and they don't think that they have a mental illness that requires medication. That's what I meant to say. They don't think they have a mental illness that requires medication. They think that they're pushed over the edge and society should treat them fairly and they'll naturally recover. That is the general consensus among the poor in society. And some people who are poor are very brilliant, okay? And I would venture to say that the wisest of the poor and anyone else would agree that, generally speaking, they have a problem with being pushed over the edge and they need to be treated fairly, and they'll come back to what you might say is reality more, you know, a more balanced state, what have you. And that's part of what's at stake when we're looking at these videos I make about this topic here. It's whether or not you can see that the government abuses people and drives them over the edge, or you believe that if anyone commits a crime ever, that they're magically mentally ill and that magically they should get medication that would have prevented it and . It's outrageous. So if people are killed over $20 who are not targeted by the government but have had a hard life and are targeted to the degree that the average poor person is, how much more somebody who the government owes $100 million conservatively when we do comparisons. For example, this one person in the news, there was this kid who was in the news, right, who was mocking this Native American person. It's like on CNN or some one of these famous stations. And basically, the station calls him a racist, and they settle with him for like over $200 million. Okay, this person was not targeted. They were not fumed. They were not poisoned. It was merely psychological. Okay, it's not something, people get insult each other left and right in the news all the time. And the news said, in their opinion, right, that they believed he's racist. Because of the semantics around it, they had to settle with him. How much more, and that's one corporation, mind you. Think about all the companies and groups that are involved in targeting. I've been targeted in 2 states. I've been targeted by the federal government, by various law enforcement agencies, various mental health groups, I'd imagine, various political groups, various corporations are involved in this. Elon Musk is probably involved in this, I don't know. Tech groups, I was in the Silicon Valley, various technological groups, maybe NASA, DARPA, on and on and on. How much more should they have to pay me? So think about it. If it is not just enough to cause somebody to threaten somebody when they're down on their luck and they're poor over $20, $100, and sometimes they even kill the person, how much more is it logical to expect me to go on and on about how I should do X, Y, and Z, or they better stop, and so on and so forth? And should we let the government collaborate and go vigilante on the wisest and the best and the most righteous person in our society? Or should they be held to account? Is it logical to try to hold me to account for the logical response of the most disciplined and moral person? Or should we hold them to account so it never gets there in the first place? Thank you. So real fast. Ironically, I was about to end the video there, and then I thought, hey, what if they take it as I'm planning to do, this, that, or the other thing, right? And so I said, okay, I better make one last clip and make it clear here. I have no intention to harm anybody at this point, and I have no intention to threaten, anyone at this point, okay? What I'm saying is that if someone like me did, not necessarily me, if someone else did, especially me, when you consider this case, but if someone else did, that we need to understand that it's not constitutional. First and foremost, it's not moral to then say, well, why did you behave that way? Why did you say that? When something like that occurs, we have to ask ourselves, what is going on here? What caused that person to behave that way? And there should be organizations that are ready to go that don't have they have no ulterior motive. They will help out citizens. But we don't see that in America, because America is not staying true to what they said on paper. Like Martin Luther King said, they are not staying true to what they said on paper. And they are scrambling to find ways to cheat me out of my constitutional rights all the time. And they're even mocking me. They're sexually harassing me with impunity, okay, because they are the enemies of America to a T. What is a bigger threat to America and democracy and the rule of moral law? Because if the law is going to be immoral, you're better off getting rid of the law than following the law. So a threat to moral law. What is a bigger threat to these things than a government and a governing class and their massive network that scramble to cheat people out of their human rights, their civil rights, their constitutional rights, and they're raping people and they're sexually harassing the most moral person in America and in the world, using a scale of righteous intensity. For example, a fire is hot, a sun is hotter. Other people are like snow at this point. Well, I'm hotter than the sun when it comes to righteousness with a universal scale. These are the facts here. I'm not an arrogant person, not a cocky person. I've been saying these things for years. Many people have heard me say these things. I put these things on bumper stickers. No viable counter argument to date. When it must be tens of thousands of people by now are aware of my arguments. Think about it.